How you doing? It is almost Christmas time, and this is a Christmas time offer for you for being a loyal listener. Join us on Patreon and you get 15% discount for the annual subscription. You're going to get first dibs on tickets for Dalkey, for Kilkenomics, and for live podcasts. You're going to be part of our book club, which I'm launching in January. You're going to get access to my monetary economics course, the one I gave in Trinity, and you're going to get a sort of a Substack backdrop of all sorts of articles that go into making these podcasts. So join us, patreon.com/Dave McWilliams between now and Christmas Day, and you get 15% discount for the annual subscription. To understand the economy, you have to understand human nature.
This podcast is powered by Acast.
How are you doing there? It is podcast time. I am looking out the window from the 31st floor of the Wynn Hotel in Las Vegas at this bizarre city, which by any environmental reasons should not exist. Should not exist. I'm looking out at a golf course and there's no evidence of water anywhere.
No.
For miles and miles. The Hoover Dam is quite far away. John, I'm in Vegas. I'm at the U2 gig. I've just gone, I was at it last night. What a strange place, Las Vegas.
Yeah.
It's like America on steroids. It's like you just got America and you just fed it with more American isms. It's an extraordinary place.
Yeah, it epitomizes everything that's kind of good and exciting about America, but also everything that's really, really bad about America. I've never been to Vegas, I have to say. I've been to its little brother, which is Reno, Nevada, and Lake Tahoe, which is kind of the same kind of deal, but on a very, very small scale.
I mean, this is, if you have ever read Hunter S. Thompson's Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, it's kind of off the scale, debauchery, mentalness. Last night, I went to see the U2 gig in the Sphere. Again, when you talk about off the scale, it's kind of otherworldly. The Sphere is this really extraordinary structure. And the visuals, I mean, you've seen U2, I've seen U2. They're always a brilliant live band.
Yeah. They're one of the best.
And then you add on top of that, this place and the Sphere and the extraordinary visuals.
Did it take anything from the songs? Because I'm dying to see that show. I'd love to see it. But I wonder, is it such an extravaganza that it takes away from that?
Well, no, it's interesting you say that. I mean, because obviously what they're doing this tour is Achtung Baby, which I believe is, I think it's their best album. I think it's an outstanding. I remember when I first heard it, I thought, wow. And I think I was reading that Bono said in Surrender in his book that The Fly, which was the single they released for Achtung Baby, the first single, was the sound of U2 taking a chainsaw to the Joshua Tree, which I thought was a very, very good way of putting it, right?
I love the Joshua Tree. I absolutely love the Joshua Tree.
Well, we're in Joshua Tree country. I mean, and that was the whole, the U2's love affair with America in the 80s. And it was Martin Luther King, and it was B.B. King, and it was the Joshua Tree, and it was all that sort of slightly evangelical, almost messianic America, right? And then they go to Berlin, and they tear it all down, and they create this Achtung Baby sound. But I think the songs were enhanced by the spectacle. But you're absolutely right. The songs are so good. I mean, the back catalogue is so good. They've just got banger after banger after banger after banger. I mean, it's extraordinary. So it's an hour and a half of just... As you said, they are the live performers. I mean, I told you years ago, the first time I saw them, I went with my cousin Cathal to...
Don't you dare say I was in the Dandelion Market.
No, I was in Leixlip. Do you remember that? No, we were too young for the Dandelion Market for that.
But everybody says that.
Yeah. You're either in the Dandelion Market or your Alpha or your Granda was in the GPO and the Rising. It was one of those two things.
Yeah.
In fact, Bono was in the GPO and the Rising. No, but I remember going to see them, and I told my mother I was going to a soccer blitz, and myself and my cousin Cathal went to see the Police in Leixlip. I think it was summer of 1980. And U2 were down the bill. They must have been very, very young. And they were like fifth on the bill, right? And they stole the show. They were just better than everybody else. And they only had about 5 songs. But they were better. You just knew these guys have something special. And whatever they have, it's an energy, it's an attitude, it's Bono's extraordinary ability as a front man.
He's a showman. He was born a showman. I always thought, I've seen U2 loads and loads of times, but I think my favorite gig of theirs was Slane in whatever year it was in the
2002, wasn't it?
yes, the
Yeah.
black and white gig, as I call it. And it was just stripped down rock and roll gig. And I just thought they were fantastic.
Well, we should both come here and do a pod from here, John, right? You and me on the strip.
Absolutely. I'm there, man. I'm there.
But this gig, I think, is coming back in January, and they're playing January and February. So it's really well worth seeing. It's a sort of next level of entertainment, you know?
So when does a gig stop being a gig and become a show?
A show.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's basically, you know, it is a show. It's Las Vegas, and it's tailor-made for Las Vegas, and the Sphere is the venue of the future.
So there's no improvisation at all then? It's
and
just...
There's quite a lot, obviously, but I mean, what I've heard is a huge amount of artists. I heard that Axl Rose was there last night.
Oh, right.
A huge amount of artists are going to see, okay, how do we do this?
Yeah.
How do we figure this out, you know?
Yeah,
but it's well worth it. And then, of course, there was the usual Irish carry-on. It's just, Paddy just can't go to sleep, no matter how jet-lagged you are, you know? So it was like, we'll have another of those margaritas, two more margaritas, and you just get into America. So let's just say the head is banging today. Okay?
I was
banging.
To quote Hunter S. Thompson, because I was look, no, there's a great quote when he goes, "We had 2 bags of grass, 75 pellets of mescaline, 5 sheets of high-powered blotter acid, a salt shaker half full of cocaine, and a whole galaxy of multicolored uppers, downers, screamers, laughers, and also a quart of tequila, a quart of rum, a case of Budweiser, a pint of raw ether, and 24 amyls."
That is Hunter S. Thompson.
And that's probably about you.
That's the Fear and Loathing. The Fear and Loathing. Well, it wasn't that bad, but it wasn't far away. So now, but I mean, the other thing is for the podcast, John.
Yeah.
You're in Trump country here, right? And you really, really get the feeling. There's also what you would love as well is the National Rodeo Championships are on at the same time, right? So it's full of cowboys and cowgirls walking around with big Stetsons and the whole
That's
thing,
Mark
right?
Flood territory, that.
Yeah, you know, it's great. It's great. In actual fact, I'm going to go to the rodeo tomorrow. I've never been to a rodeo. I'm going to go to the rodeo tomorrow. So I'm going to get the whole American experience, John, right?
But excellent.
And then I'll be home next week.
Dallas Buyers Club.
Yeah, exactly. But you're in deep Trump country here. And you get when you're chatting to people here, they're mainly Republican voters, you know, the punters turning up at the rodeo.
Yeah, you'll get some pretty unique views there, all right.
Well, do you know what I think? It's a very interesting week. We'll probably go into it a little bit more in a week or so's time, but it's a very, very interesting week for Ukraine, right? Because it's quite clear that the Americans the Republicans and the Americans, particularly the right wing of the Republicans, have made Ukraine almost like a wedge issue in the culture war.
Okay.
That they don't want to support Ukraine, that they're dragging their heels when it comes to Ukraine, and they don't seem to get it. And this is all playing into Trump's idea of the United States can simply go it alone. And you know, the weird thing about the States is it can go it alone in the sense that it's the only major power that has got 2 oceans separating it from the rest of the world. It is the biggest food producer in the world. It has the biggest military in the world. It has the biggest navy in the world. It's a nuclear power. It now is energy self-sufficient because of fracking. You may or may not like it, but that's where it's at.
Yeah, sure.
The United States can just close its doors if it wants. It really can, and say to the rest of the world, you know what? Off you go. Sort yourselves out. We do not want to be either the arsenal of democracy or the global policeman anymore. And if it does that, that's of course what you get the sense, you know, with Ukraine, that the Republicans are either fed up of Ukraine or they don't see the significance of Ukraine. And the Democrats are completely split now because of Israel, because the Democrats are split on Israel, because the progressives are naturally saying to Biden, you can't keep supporting Netanyahu. So what you get this cocktail. If you had said to us this time last year, like Christmas of last year, what was likely to happen, right? This is just before, remember, I went to Kiev in January of last year, right? And there was a sense that the West was united, that Europe was united, that America was behind them, that the Russians had actually miscalculated, which I still think they did. But if you're looking, Christmas from the Kremlin this year looks very different to Christmas from the Kremlin last year. And that's key.
Yes, it does. And the thing about it is that it seems that Putin has, really got into these Trump supporters.
Yeah, completely.
There's a kind of an whether it's support or not, there's a kind of an admiration for Putin, which is really bizarre.
Yeah, which is really, really strange. It's really, really strange. And so you have this at the same time. So geopolitically, America seems incredibly divided. Of course, you've got the election coming up.
Yeah.
And it looks, at least the polls suggest that he's quite odds-on favorite now. I mean, Biden's poll ratings are is atrocious. Now, what that means for the economy is weird, because you also have this week, Jay Powell gave the financial markets the biggest presence they've had in the last 4 years, because he basically said, look, inflation is done. We've achieved what we want to achieve. We are going to cut interest rates. We're going to cut them quite quickly. And of course, stocks and bonds and everything. And you really get the feel in the United States that everything is built on credit here. Like the whole thing is built on credit, And when interest rates are 5%, it's a sort of a slightly downbeat United States. If interest rates go back to 2% or 3%, because inflation is now down at 2 or 3%, this place is going to boom again.
And so what does that mean for Europe? Or does that mean that America is going to, economically, it's going to pull away from Europe and from the Western world, actually?
Well, I mean, the thing is, you have the Trumpian isolationist trend. Now, the interesting thing, remember we talked about Benjamin Franklin last week,
yes,
right?
Yes, we did.
Thomas Jefferson, right, one of the other founding fathers, he was also part of this strain in the American political culture, which is isolationist, almost sort of utopian, almost sort of like Jefferson had this sort of rural idyll idea that America could pull away and could be this sort of shining city on the hill and create this new republic, all that sort of stuff. And that's a very, very deep strain within the Republican Party in the United States.
Yeah.
And of course, Alexander Hamilton was the opposite. He was saying, no, we've got to become a global superpower, et cetera, et cetera. And that has always been a big battle in the States. And of course, Trump is very much of the view that, the United States can go it alone. So what it means for Europe are two things. One is that Trump, although he doesn't like Netanyahu, is the most anti-Palestinian president the Americans have ever had, right? He doesn't like Netanyahu personally, but he's totally and utterly in the pocket of the Israeli right wing. So just imagine America doesn't support Ukraine, but supports Israel. What that does to Europe is that means that Europe has to take a stand on both these issues, right? It means that Europe has to re-energize its military spending. It has to hugely invest in military technology. And it's a totally different, if America disappears as the global policeman, just for, in the last 40 years, Europeans have never, ever thought about their security. Yeah. And in the last 40 years, Europeans have always never really taken a side on the Middle East. They've always been, a bit of this and a bit of that. That could all change completely. And you get the sense also when you're in the States, because I spent last week in LA, Europe is very, very far away. You're looking at a new civilization almost emerging. And the West Coast civilization in America looks to China, it looks to Asia. Although it feels European, it increasingly feels like something very, very new. And you can understand why they're saying, look, man, the old country back there, get your act together.
So could this be a big boon for the UK, for instance?
No, I don't think so. I think the UK, I think the Yanks regard the UK as the crown, as far as I can see, right? It's basically, it's an interesting place to go to buy souvenirs and listen to music and things. So what I would just say, I think that Europe, the EU, NATO, all those issues are up for discussion again, which is phenomenal. And had you said that this time last year, people said, no. On the contrary, the Western liberal tradition is now well-financed, well-resourced, intellectually, by far and away the most persuasive ideology out there. Doesn't look like that anymore. And that's only in 1 year. So these are my thoughts. But what we'll do is actually, John, next week, we'll have another podcast from the States on Thursday from LA, because LA has been intriguing me. And I'm going to think a little bit more about it. But right now, from Vegas, what you get is a sense of, well, this is obviously Sodom and Gomorrah here, right? Okay, that's you get that, right? But you do get the sense that America would be quite happy to just pull away from the rest of the world.
It's kind of scary.
It is really scary. And it's actually the first time since the Second World War. If you think about it, it's the first time since Woodrow Wilson, in the First World War, committed the United States to the League of Nations. And that's where he said, look, we are going to be an international player. So that's 100 years. So we've had 100 years of American hegemony. Really, really have.
Mm.
And 100 years, almost to the year, we're now seeing the United States saying, you know what? Thanks, but no thanks. We're only 5% of the world's population, maybe 4% of the world's population. We don't have the resources to be the policeman anymore. And frankly, we don't want to be the policeman anymore. And that's a very appealing message to American voters, particularly if the economy starts to do well. What they'll just say is, look, things are going well here. Why should we bother? And that is something that I don't think Europeans have got their head around at all. Certainly, we haven't in Ireland either.
Europeans are going to be the big losers in all of this.
Yeah, look, well, our Europe will actually begin to look like the continent that it could be, which is a much more muscular, much more self-aware continent. I mean, at the moment,
pull up our big boy pants kind of thing.
Yeah. So these are thoughts that I'm having here as I am musing on whether I'll have
on your tequila and mescaline and the lot.
But actually, I do want to also talk to you, John, about something I saw 2 days ago. I went from the bizarre to the ridiculous. I went from the Huntington Museum in Pasadena in California, where I saw one of the last of the 48 surviving Gutenberg Bibles. You know, this is an obsession of mine, right?
Well, hang on a second. So that's going from Hunter S. Thompson to the Huntington Museum. Yeah. Let's talk about that in just a minute.
Grant.
Mac, you've left Las Vegas. You're now in LA.
Channeling my inner Nicolas Cage leaving Las Vegas. Did you ever see that movie?
Yes, it did.
I'm now in LA.
Miserable movie.
I'm in Pasadena, actually, just outside LA. I'm at an extraordinary place called the Huntington Museum and Gardens, right? Huntington was one of these American industrialists who had that sort of Renaissance man thing going on in the last century, the turn of the last century. And he set about buying up and collecting very, very rare books. One of them is a book that I'm fascinated with, which is the Gutenberg Bible. So
yeah, I was amazed to hear that it was there, actually. It seems kind of out of place there almost. Well,
it is, and it's really funny. I was the only person in the bloody museum. There it is, probably the most significant piece of technology that influenced the world in enormous ways.
Yeah.
And it's sitting there on its Sweeney Todd in this library, and people are just passing it by as if,
Really?
Yeah, and it's
like the Book of Kells. Is it not kind of presented in a big case and all that kind of stuff?
But it's competing with Starbucks and things like that. It's America. But what was fascinating about it, though, is when you look at the Gutenberg Bible and you see it. So there's basically 48 copies left in the world, and there's only 6 copies on parchment, on animal hide. Right?
Yeah.
And this is one of the last 6 on animal hide, right? And when you look at the Gutenberg Bible, and this is the fascinating thing, it is so beautiful, right? It is so aesthetically beautiful. And the reason is that Gutenberg was a jeweler, right? He was a designer before he was an engineer. So people always talk about, the Gutenberg Bible and how it completely changed printing and how it completely changed reading and how it completely changed information. And it was really the democratization of knowledge. And that is a fantastic inflection point. And the world changed thereafter, right? But it's kind of appropriate you're in California, the kind of home of the iPhone and the Tesla and all these things, the home of Apple, because what you see is that Gutenberg was like Steve Jobs. He was a designer first.
Yeah.
In the same ways, everyone talks about Jobs, the technologist, but it's Jobs and Johnny Ive at Apple came up with the designs. And they wanted things to not only be technologically interesting and path-breaking, but they also wanted things to be beautiful. So the iPhone is a beautiful looking thing. It's a beautiful product, And I remember, do you remember Johnny Ive was at the Dalkey Book Festival a couple of years ago?
Yes,
And his very, very first thing, and actually Bono was interviewing him, and his very, very first thing.
With Stephen Fry.
Stephen Fry and Johnny Ive. Yeah. It was an amazing one. But what really intrigued me about Johnny Ive is he looked really grumpy at the start. And Bono said to him, "You all right, Johnny?" And this is the main designer of Apple. And he's an English guy. And he goes, no, Bono, I'm not all right, because you see that lectern, it's really ugly.
Yeah, that's right.
And it was really getting on his nerves. So the lectern that we thought was lovely, right? It was a glass.
Carted away.
He said, please get it away. I can't look at that. It's ugly, right?
I remember that.
Remember that? I was like, Jesus, where's this chat going to go? But there was the eye of the designer, the person who looks at design. And when you look at the Gutenberg Bible, what you see is that Gutenberg himself was a designer. And he wanted it to be not only an extraordinary piece of technology, but he wanted it to be beautiful. And he wanted it to appeal to aesthetics. And he wanted it to appeal to the people who would ultimately buy the Bible, which were the church. So he wanted to appeal to their vanity and the church's obsession with beauty, and particularly the Renaissance church, the pre-Renaissance church. That whole idea of beauty and wealth. And when you look at the Bible, you think, wow. And then you think, the world changed after this book. And the reason it changed is because information became more democratic. You had an explosion in literacy, people wanting to learn. And if you think about, skills, that idea of the meta skill is the skill that enables other things to happen. Yeah. And if you think the meta skill of the medieval age was reading, so that enabled other things to happen, because then suddenly people started to think about the Enlightenment and think about science and think about, well, this God thing, I'm not too sure about that. And the fascinating thing, and we'll come on to this,
spread the word of God as well.
Spread the word of God. And of course, what Martin Luther understood was that you only needed one person to be able to read, to spread the word of God, because that one person would be the town crier. And if you labeled and repackaged Protestantism in pamphlets, which was Martin Luther's little innovation, you could get one guy telling the rest of the world about things. And they also had these extraordinary sort of vulgar, to use that expression, depictions of priests fornicating and all sorts of things on the printed page, So it was a whole package. But what fascinates me is that reading is the meta skill. And if you look now at the new Gutenberg Bible, John, it's AI. This is the new Gutenberg Bible. This is the new revolution.
Yeah. I see what you mean.
This is the technology that will change the way the world works. And then you think if reading was the meta skill that enabled people to actually use printing to its most disruptive and innovative way, what is the meta skill that will allow people to use AI? And that brings us to, I think, a very interesting statistic last week, John, that came out, which was the OECD PISA scores on education, right?
What is PISA?
PISA means Program for International Student Assessment. That's PISA, right?
Right.
So basically, OECD takes 15-year-olds all around the world in every single country, and it gauges their ability in maths, in science, and in reading.
Right.
And it's a crucial indicator of how well or badly the education system is going. Now, fascinatingly, here in America, what you see is those grades are falling off the cliff across the United States.
Yeah.
So it's always the case in America, which is when they are good, they are the best at everything, right? But on average, what you find is underinvestment in education is having a profound impact on the intelligence and the education level of these people. Ireland, on the other hand, did extremely well. So it took 5,569 kids in 170 Irish schools, right? And overall, amongst 15-year-olds, Irish children scored amongst the highest in reading, second in the world, up from 8th in 2018. We're above average in maths. We're 11th in the world, up from 21st in 2018. And in science, we're 12th in the world, up from 22nd. So what you see,
quite a
John,
jump, actually.
It's a massive
really
jump.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's been talked about enough, that what you have is this complete change in the performance of the education system in Ireland, of the basic secondary school and the basic primary school. And is it because, dare I say, maybe immigrant kids are coming in and they're working harder because that's something you see? Or is it because the education system is just working better? Is it because the teachers are working better? Something is happening.
There's been quite a few changes in how education is delivered. And, what year did you say this was?
So this is from 2018 to now. So it's only 5 years. right?
But there was the pandemic in the middle of that, which
I
disrupted
know.
schooling. I wonder
But
how that kind of impacted on it. Actually, it's interesting, Mark, that so happened to be the Trump era as well, or partly the Trump era. And Trump appointed your one Betsy DeVos as the education, who dismantled the United States education system. And I wonder how much of that has had an impact on these numbers, especially when they're talking about isolationism as well.
I think it has to be. I mean, Trump. Look, the very interesting thing about trying to understand Trump voters in the United States, somebody said, and I can't remember who it was, that Trump voters do not, the sort of left behinds, right?
Yeah.
They don't despise the rich. They despise the professional classes. They despise the educated, right? The people who walk around with their degrees and their parchments and the elitism of all that. So it is all in the mix, John. You're absolutely right. I mean, this is not, you can't see this in isolation. This isn't something that just happened overnight. American kids didn't just become less academic. Something
Yeah.
is happening in the United States, and it's all part of this political, economic, and social cocktail that is isolationist, that is anti-elite, that is anti the status quo, that basically wants to tear things down. And you remember Trump said, I love the uneducated. That was one of his things, right?
Yes, yeah.
And it chimed with lots of people. Lots of people said, yeah, fuck it.
Yeah.
I'm sick of being talked down to by people. I'm sick of being patronized. I'm with you.
Yeah.
Well, what it seems is that in contrast to the United States, because I'm here, where all those indicators are falling off the cliff, right? The Americans are underperforming in maths, they're underperforming in science, they're underperforming in reading, and that's the average kid, right?
Yeah.
What you see in Ireland is the opposite is happening, that the education system has delivered an amazing result over the last the last 4 or 5 years. And again, sometimes we complain about Ireland and the transport system doesn't work and the housing is screwed and we want to change it. But actually, at a very fundamental level, this is an extraordinary signal for the future of the country, because what it means is that the meta skill to deal with technological change is always education, right?
Yeah.
Have you got the intellectual wherewithal? Have you got the educational wherewithal to deal with a changing world? And what it looks like, if you look at those scores, that if you take AI as being as dramatic as the Gutenberg Bible on how it's going to disrupt the world, and then you think, okay, well, what equips you to deal with this disruption is education. What you see in Ireland is that the kids are actually much better educated now than they were 5 years ago relative to the rest of the world,
Yeah.
and therefore much better qualified, or at least better equipped to deal with this changing world.
Yeah.
And the fascinating thing is nobody has any idea how the world is going to change as a result of AI, but I'll just leave you with one thought, right? The Gutenberg Bible was commissioned by the Catholic Church. Without the Catholic Church, Gutenberg had no client, right? They were the main buyers of Bibles, right? Fascinatingly, the very institution that commissioned the Gutenberg Bible was almost destroyed by the Gutenberg Bible because the Gutenberg Bible facilitated Martin Luther. So the Gutenberg Bible is commissioned in 1453 by the Archbishop of Mainz in Germany, right? And Mainz in Germany at the time was like the Silicon Valley of the time. It was on the River Rhine, beside the River Neckar. It was the Mosel Valley connecting the Rhine and Frankfurt, the Nectar. It was a hub of activity, right? A little bit like Silicon Valley, right? So what you have is the church commissions the Bible. Nobody in the church would have ever thought that commissioning this printing press was going to lead to the destruction of the church itself and the 30 Years' War in Germany, which was the most vicious sectarian war that Europe had ever seen.
Yeah.
So when you think about AI, and I know you're an AI skeptic, and you're not so much you're a skeptic, but you're thinking, hold on a second. You think, what forces are going to be unleashed by this technology at a time, to tie it all in, John, where the United States may be geopolitically saying, we're going to disengage from the world, where Mr. Putin is sitting in the Kremlin thinking, you know what, this hasn't been a bad 12 months for me, and where Israel is actively destroying Gaza in front of our very eyes. So you put that into the mix, And you see what Gutenberg's Bible did to the medieval age, and you think, what the hell is AI going to do to ours?